This is the Real Ones podcast with your host, Ben Moskow, brought to you by Project FILO. I'd love for you to just give some background for our listeners. Who is Leor Galil? Are you a lifelong Chicagoan? Also, like, where have you resided? Sort of give us the whole spiel.
I grew up in the DC area and went to school in the Boston area. I went to Brandeis in Waltham, Massachusetts, did AmeriCorps for a year afterwards in Roxbury, Massachusetts, and then came out to Chicago for grad school at Northwestern.
There you go.
And yeah, I started freelance writing about music right before I actually moved out here. And The Reader was a publication that I loved from afar for a long time. I love all weeklies. I grew up with the Washington City paper. Whenever I went to New York, I'd read the Village Voice, the Boston Phoenix out in the Boston area before that died. That was the first place to actually pay me to publish something, which was awesome. That was more than a decade at this point. But yeah, I moved out here in 2009, successfully pitched my editor Philip Montoro in the spring of 2010, and my first story for the Reader came out in June of 2010, and I just kept pitching until I wound up on staff, and I've been a staffer for the Chicago Reader since 2012.
Wow, yeah, coming up on 10 years, and as a staff writer, and you've been pitching stories for even longer than that. So, try to take us through the process of pitching a story, especially when you don't really have any contact with the publication. What are some good tips for reaching out, etc. How did that work for you?
Yeah, that's
And also, do you remember like that first story?
Yeah, the first story was about Strangelight. It was a DIY space that was in Logan Square. It was in one of the storefronts of the Congress Theater that used to be a moped shop. And these guys threw punk shows in the basement. They were one of several kind of self-run venues within the Congress storefronts. There had been at least one or two that existed before they moved in, and they just happened to be around the time that I moved to Chicago and started really booking some great shows around that time too. So even though I was new to town, I was able to like understand the context of what they were doing, why they were special. It was an all ages venue, specifically had a no drinking, no drugs, no smoking policy, so that it could be open to younger people who otherwise don't have access to shows in Chicago. There aren't that many,
Or would have been trying to sneak in, right?
yeah, there are. I mean, outside of like huge festivals and big arena shows, it's not like there are a lot of opportunities for young people to see music in the city. Reggie's for a while was booking all ages rap shows around the same time, but
Mhm.
I mean, those opportunities were few and far between. So there's something really exciting about self-run space that specifically advocates for young people to come, and that was part of what hooked my editor. Freelance pitching an editor that you've never worked with is hard. Part of the challenge is trying to figure out when trying to guesstimate when that editor has time to go through emails. And
Right.
obviously, every editor is different. Every publication has a different schedule. Alt weeklies, I knew, would publish on Wednesdays/Thursdays. So the print edition generally was available everywhere Thursday mornings, but really started to get to the streets Wednesday nights, which meant that they were publishing Tuesday nights. So that Wednesdays typically the quietest day, kind of like a relief day after an intense 2 day period of prepping everything for print. So I realized when I was pitching the Phoenix that was the day to pitch something, because that's when editors would be catching up on emails. And I knew to keep things brief. I had James Parker, who used to write for the Boston Phoenix, I believe is still writing for the Atlantic. He's a pop culture writer, does fantastic work. I was emailing with him after I graduated from school. He gave me a lot of great advice on pitching, and he was just like, "You just got to keep it short. You need to be able to show an editor that you know what you're talking about, and that you're the best person for the story, and do so in a paragraph or two." And being able to be concise is a great way to show that you have the authority to write about something, or maybe not like total authority. Who has total authority? That is a strange concept, but you at least have a certain amount of expertise that would allow you to further write about this for the publication. Obviously familiarizing yourself with a publication, what makes it unique, what the voice is like a priority. You don't want to be pitching, like some celebrity gossip to the reader. That's not who we are. But if it's a story that involves celebrities, and there's some sort of grounding in local community, and it says something about the what it means to be a Chicagoan now or in the past and how that's reflected now, then yeah, obviously that's great for us. The best thing that you can do as a potential freelancer is to not only familiarize yourself with the publication, but to see what the holes are, to see what in terms of their coverage isn't there and would be a good fit, and then arguing for that, showing like this is a great story, it fits for what you do, you haven't covered it, I know what I'm saying. And usually by being able to point out those holes in a story pitch, that's a great way to show an editor that you are the right person to write that story. Kind of the benefits of being a staff writer is that I can help point out writers that are out there and encourage them, and tell them to pitch, and like suggest to my editor, oh, like I think this person would be good at this. We've never worked with them.
So as for like the model of the alt weekly, what about that appealed to you?
There's a depth and care and interest in the things that aren't mainstream, for one thing. Like it shows, to me, it always showed that there was more to living in a city than just what was in the mainstream news. And I grew up with the Washington Post as well. Like before I discovered the Washington City paper, my parents still have a Washington Post subscription, which I love. One of my quote unquote career highlights was being able to write about one of my favorite bands for the Post. Like that is an amazing publication. They publish great music writing and great criticism. And but there was something about the Washington City paper that just like had a depth and a character that was absent from what I saw in the mainstream press. It was almost novelistic in a way, the way that it captured the sense of what's happening in the city, and could zoom in on characters that aren't of interest to a wider audience, or we're told aren't of interest to a wider audience, but probably are. They just might not ever get the opportunity to be in a larger paper.
Yeah.
Um, and I just in general love subterranean underground cultures, love cultures that exist for for themselves, that don't operate to appeal to the status quo, that are expressing something that is innately human in ways that I can't find on TV, on terrestrial radio. And obviously, like as those things get popular and cross over, and that's awesome, and it's cool to document that. But I love the space and the range, and the looseness, and kind of the joyfulness and the humor of alt weeklies. You could be free to do a lot of things that you can't in a daily newspaper. I can curse in the Reader. I don't often,
Right,
but I
right.
often quote people who do. And so there's a lot of freedom in that, and that's exciting.
When we think of journalism and the industry as a whole over the past year has been, things have obviously been difficult. And there had been, the Reader I know was trying to, raise funds along with a lot of other sort of like alternative publications. And you had been on furlough for a little while. I guess other staffers had kind of like alternated in taking the furlough, and they brought people back like as they could. But what was that experience like for you? And also in general, like, journalists have kind of had to be a little more resourceful in terms of, marketing themselves and kind of casting a wider net. So, if you could just kind of speak on that.
Sure. I mean, the cuts were unpleasant. They were unfortunate.
I
They were
wasn't, yeah, I wasn't
yeah,
expecting you to love them.
yeah. They were temporary,
Right.
which made it easier. I did I did a week of furlough a month for about 4 months. So I'd be working for like 3 weeks and then have a week of unpaid leave, and then come back. And there was a period where it was just like I worked in December. I had a week of furlough right before New Year's. I came back and I had a day for New Year's off, and then I had another week of furlough for the month of January. And part of that was just like balancing my schedule against one of my editors took furlough too. And so being able to, like, the challenge of trying to figure out as a team, how do we do this in a way that allows us to make the most out of a bad situation. I managed to come up with a system that allowed me to continue to do kind of the bigger projects that I wanted to do at a complicated rate. It made returning to work kind of like a crunch, and then I would collapse, in my off weeks. But I was also doing freelance, to pick up the slack. I did some freelance stories. I hadn't really freelanced in a long time just because the reader, I'm lucky that I'm a staff writer. I'm incredibly lucky that I have a
Right.
full-time staff job. That is rare. It's amazing, and take uh, I do not take that for granted. And freelance opportunities are few and far between in general. And I just don't, my free time is precious. I don't want to I don't always want to do things that remind me of my day job in my free time, although I'm constantly coming up with ideas that I want to chase down.
Right.
There's only so many hours in the day, and it's a good way to exhaust you. But considering that I had essentially an entire month of, over the course of 4 months, total of a month of unpaid leave, I needed to find some extra income. It is amazing, given how many publications have completely fallen apart since the pandemic, that you know, we're doing all right. We've had no editorial layoffs this entire time. And that includes the period with the cuts. And we're more than a year into the pandemic. And we lost 90% of our advertising revenue in less than a week of the pandemic starting. It's amazing that we've managed to survive. As challenging as that was, it was really beautiful to see so many people in this city and around the country kind of come out of the woods to be like, yeah, way to go, like this paper is great. I'm definitely like throwing down a lot of my money that I don't necessarily have during this time
Right.
to help them. Like, that meant and means the world to me, and obviously my coworkers too. As far as like resourcefulness for journalists, I that's hard. That is a
Yeah.
hard question to answer. So many of the quote unquote successful journalists, particularly in music and culture writing, um, in recent years have managed to carve out a space for themselves independent of a publication, because so many big national publications have just completely gutted or fallen apart. Even, pandemic aside, although during the pandemic it felt like weekly there was like, there goes the outline, there goes Mel recently. Like, there's so many great places that publish the kind of writing that alt weeklies still do, and long had before that had published, that just went under. Cultural journalism in particular is looking a lot more like an extracurricular for a lot of talented journalists, and it should not be that way. My hope is really within the next couple of years there can be more financial support for nonprofit journalist entities to get off the ground. Because if we've learned anything from the pandemic, it's that, like, news is important for us to be able to live, and cultural journalism is a huge part of that. Cultural journalism, you know me writing about music doesn't prevent you from dying of a deadly virus, but it does give you a better sense of what's happening in the world around you. And
It makes
that's,
life more enjoyable. Yeah.
yeah, what are you living for? If for me, music makes life so rich and allows me to really sit with complicated feelings, uh,
Yeah.
that all great art does. um, and don't you want to know more about that? uh, so hopefully there will be a greater drive for more independent nonprofit journalism entities in the world, because we need that. We need journalism initiatives that aren't connected to a monopoly. I'm talking about Alden Global Capital, which ran the Denver Post into the ground. I don't know how much of it is functioning, but there was like 2 years ago where they laid off half the Denver Post staff. Alden Global Capital buys newspapers in order to strip them for parts, and that's what they've started to do for the Trib, since last year, and could very well do soon enough if they get total ownership of it. So there needs to be fewer ways for you know uh, yeah, parasitic companies that just exist to strip journalism entities of their ability to do the basic components of the job, and more places that exist for journalists to be able to do their work without worrying about about the stability of their job.
This is not something I know a ton about right now, but like the motivation of a company like Alden Global Capital, like what is the advantage of like when you say stripping for parts, like what are they trying to do? Are they trying to find individual journalists to go work somewhere else, or what does that mean?
Making money is the bottom line. Like
Right,
that's what it's all about. Like, their interest in journalism is only what they can get, what they can, uh, lead it's they bleed journalism companies dry for more money for, stakeholders. That's it. I don't understand. Like, there's a lot about that I don't understand, and I don't understand in particular why anyone would do that to journalism companies in particular, except that, in the 90s, the Tribune could print money, and it's just been mismanaged to basically to its current place, which often feels like not a good one, despite the good work of the journalists. But yeah, Alden as an entity isn't, they're in the journalism business, but they're in the business of making money. The goal of a journalistic entity shouldn't be making
profit.
money. That,
Right.
yeah, like, profit gets in the way, too often can get in the way of the basic reason that most journalists get into this field, which is to tell us what's going on. How many hard news stories maybe get 50 readers, but it's important to have somebody on the ground covering that stuff, because it's happening, and it gives us context to what could happen down the line. One city council meeting can lead to a lot of bad things or good things down the road, and if we don't have somebody covering that stuff, how the hell are we supposed to know what's going on around us?
You were saying before, like about how about the importance of like being qualified to tell the story in a pitch, right? You've written a lot about the punk scene. I think has been a big focus of yours. You've also had interviews with Pivot Gang and Femdot, and like you've gone off into a ton of different genres. But what? How do you prepare yourself to feel qualified to tell stories like that? To tell stories of people who probably don't share the same sort of background as you, or and maybe there's like certain cultural context that may be hard to understand.
Sure, acknowledging the difference is the first step. Like, I know that I'm a white Jewish guy. I know that my experience is different. My lived experience is different than most of the people that I talk to, and allowing myself to feel comfortable asking, one, feeling uncomfortable in my reporting situation, and two, asking questions. That's the key thing. I need to be open to the experiences of the people that I'm talking to. And what I love about this job is that I get to learn every day. I've been reporting on Chicago hip hop for like a decade at this point, and I'm always learning. Every day I hear a new artist that excites me, and I learn of somebody else's experience. And it's about being able to learn as much as I can about what they do beyond just the music that's coming out of them, to get a better sense of what they're expressing in their music. Like, with Femdot, I've written about him so many times before. I wrote, my feature on him last year. So I had a good jumping off point. And like, we've talked a bunch over the years. So I was able to, like, I knew part of his story. And here, like, we got to talk for an hour, and I got to learn more about his story and his recent story and his recent motivations as a member of the greater Chicago community.
With
And
the
that's
Rem, right?
fun for me.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's super fun for me. With Pivot Gang, I've been writing about those guys since, I think John Wall was the first member of Pivot Gang that I wrote about. All those guys are so impressive, and it's been amazing to see how how much they've grown, and also see the ways that they've been able to grow off of each other. It's been really moving, it's one of the great highlights of my career that I've been able to write about them so consistently over the years, and that you know they've wanted to share their story with me, and that I've been, in Saba and Chilliam's home. Like, I've been in the basement where they had kind of everyone from the Chicago scene come out to Austin and record in their basement,
Man.
and learn about them down there. It is a real gift to have a stranger open themselves up to you in their home. and I don't take that for granted. And I am really appreciative of those opportunities to learn learn from artists in such an intimate way. And my responsibility is to show that to people who have no idea who these people are, and to show that these people are important. What they're expressing is important. What they mean to the greater music scene is important, and what they're doing is critical to our understanding of what culture in this city is. I want to show what people are doing here that's good. I love writing about new musicians. There's a great joy in being able to find music that's unfamiliar to me and being like, wow, this rules. I think somebody else will like it too, and I want to know more about it.
Something that's, very exciting about this to me is hearing about an artist, before other people have kind of caught on. And, in some cases I've been able to be the first, person to write a feature or do an interview with an artist. And then I just have so much invested in their career going forward. It's like, just about building relationships, which has been really a big part of the allure for me in the early going.
And now a quick word from our sponsor. This episode is sponsored by GB Mystical and GB Mastering, offering boutique recording mixes, mastering, and audio post-production at competitive rates and based in Chicago. We focus on serving our clients quickly and professionally without breaking the bank. Are you an artist trying to make their next song pop? Don't second guess. Make it sound right. Contact at GB Mystical on Instagram or check out gbmystical.com for audio examples, his original music, and more. That's GB Mystical, mystical.com. And again, most of the booking happens on Instagram. So that's GB Mystical on Instagram to lock in your mixing and mastering services today.
One thing I've, sort of wondered about, and I think a lot of people wonder about this as they first start to get to journalism, is like, how do you make a subject feel comfortable enough to open up? Or is there a certain approach you'll take, kind of questions you'll ask?
What we're doing, it's it's you go in having a conversation. Like that's that. I think it was Norman Brannon's Antimatter anthology, which Norman is a member of Texas is the Reason, the mid-90s emo band that's really fantastic. And he wrote, he had a zine in the 90s called Antimatter, and reading that in high school and seeing the way that that these Q&As that he had were just conversations really was like a light bulb going off for me. Like you don't have to go in with a set of questions. And often I can't think of a time that I've gone in with like, all right, here's a list of things that I am going to ask you, and I'm going to stick to this rubric, because that gets in the way of being able to learn when you're just stuck on a script. I like to just listen. So I think it works much better for the style of reporting that I do, to just, sit there and not obviously be a passive listener, but to know that you're not in focus at all, which
Right.
I shouldn't be. I'm the person writing. I'm not the subject. Nor do I want to be. You know what I mean? I'm there to write about whoever I'm writing about, and obviously I'm the one who ends up writing the stories. So I have power in that and agency in that. But I'm there to just learn from the person who knows best, which is the person I'm speaking to.
The subject, yeah. I mean, it's an interesting thing being a journalist, because there's sort of obviously you kind of have to have this very outgoing nature about you and being willing to put yourself into certain situations, but then also not necessarily getting the type of attention of sort of taking a backseat to the stories you're telling. It's an interesting dynamic. That you've written countless features, right? You've published this book, actually. So and that's recently out of sort of like a way to fundraise for the reader during the pandemic as well. I believe, yeah, the release came out last year, towards the end of last year.
Yeah, it was about a year ago. We published a collection of my stories. Yeah, my book was the first one of a series of books by reader staffers collecting kind of the best stories. So I picked 20 of mine, which was challenging. I say this all the time. My favorite story is the one that I'm working on right now, which is true. You want to be excited about what you're working on right now, and I'm lucky in that's often the case. I'm really excited about the stories that I'm working on now. So yeah, picking 20 of them was challenging.
Yeah, no kidding. I mean, and even with the 20, like, do you have any that stand out as like your favorite? Probably not, right?
I mean, yeah, all no, it's hard. I mean, the story that kicked off the book was kind of like the first big story in my career that I often, it was really challenging coming off of that piece because it just it felt like nothing else. And I've never written a story like that before. It was about Willis Earl Beal, who was an anti-folk musician who I found after.
Anti-folk.
Yeah, yeah. Like, I mean, you could think of it as like the punk version of folk, like using kind of the language and instrumentation of traditional folk music, but doing it in an unconventional way. Um, so, which, was what I found Willis because I found one of his flyers hanging up in a little nook in Myopic Books in Wicker Park that said, "I want some friends and stuff," and had a phone number. And I'm
Oh,
not a weasel, and it had his name, and it had this drawing which I found out was like a portrait of himself. And I called the number and couldn't get through, and I looked him up online, and one of the few things that I found was a blog spot, like this guy who was living in Albuquerque at the time, talking about how he met Willis after Willis was featured in Found magazine for posting a similar flyer around Albuquerque. And he met up with Willis and he recorded some songs with Willis and also posted some of Willis's songs. And they were this like really tender and moving and fragile and disarming songs that just like hit me like a lightning bolt. The minute I heard these MP3s, I wanted to meet this person. Like I felt like he was communicating something about what I was going through being a 25-year-old. Like it wasn't about me at all, but it made me feel like I was being understood by a complete stranger. It was this deep connection and it moved me so much. So I managed to get a hold of him and I wrote this story and he got a record deal out of it. Like like he went from living at his grandmother's, house on the far south side to signing with XL Records, touring with Cat Power, who is his favorite, one of his favorite musicians, like recording like a follow-up record that was like really moving and reminded me of TV on the radio and reminded me of all this other pop music that I love, and living a really his life as an artist in the public eye was really fascinating to see, and it was bizarre feeling like I had any role in his kind of like sudden, like not that he was obviously working on art, writing and drawing and music prior to the moment that I heard him, but yeah, it was like a lightning bolt. He was performing at festivals, he was touring Europe, he starred in a movie, and just being like, this is a guy that I like. I just wish that I pitched the story because I wanted one other person to feel the way about his music that I feel. So knowing that other people were able to experience his music and that I play even a minor role in that was
yeah.
really something. But coming off of that story and like a week later he was getting, like he had a major independent label that was, at the time was still working with Radiohead, I believe, and Vampire Weekend and, all these like big indie acts, Adele and, what have you. And just
Man.
feeling this like weird, like out of body sense of like, this is something that I participated in, but I just feel like a weird, I feel like a helpless 25-year-old who can like barely scrape together enough money for rent. And coming off of that was like so bizarre and surreal. And I still don't know how to feel about it. And that was like a decade ago,
Yeah.
Um,
And it really all stemmed from that one this thing you find at this record store or whatever, this
yeah,
like that note
bookstore.
right there, right?
Yeah.
Bookstore, yeah.
Yeah. I remember in grad school, I went to Medill and we had to, the first quarter we had all these lectures, and one of the people giving us a lecture was like, you're going to look for stories. You need to look for stories everywhere. And I was thinking like, that's exhausting. That sounds exhausting. I don't want to work all the time.
It does sound exhausting.
Yeah. But I was doing that to begin with. I just didn't think of it as work. And I still don't think of it as work. Like often something will catch my eye at like 11 p.m. when I'm surfing the internet, and I'll just spend an hour, you know, chasing
Right.
it down. I think that natural curiosity that a lot of people have, I'm not special in that regard, is the kind of thing that fuels great journalism. Um, so yeah, I try to keep my eyes open for anything, just in general, because hey, that's the fun part about living in a city like Chicago, is experiencing experiencing things that are new to you,
Yeah.
and interacting with so many interesting people from different backgrounds. Like that's fun. That's why I live here.
In terms of the future, you've been at the Reader for over a decade, right? Are you content to sort of stay with them forever, or do you have any other aspirations that you hope for?
I don't know. Yeah, I mean, I want to continue to do the kind of writing and storytelling that I'm doing now. And if it's better for me to go somewhere else, that's, and if that opportunity opens up for me, sure. I'm hyper aware that I am in a position that is almost like non-existent elsewhere. There aren't any all weeklies that have one person whose entire job is writing about music. Like there are music editors who also write about music, but they're also, courting with freelancers. They're doing a lot of responsibilities that I don't do. And my big fear is that whenever I do leave the Reader, I won't be replaced.
Yeah.
So if I can help get to a position where my job, or my, this position as music writer, is secure, won't just disappear, then that's that I will be much more comfortable leaving. I don't know at what point that will be. I think I still have like a year or two left with the Reader. But as before we got purchased away from the Sun Times, like within the month of the change in ownership, the other music writer left, and his position just disappeared. And
Yeah.
that was hard for so many reasons. Peter was a force. He'd been at the paper for 25 years. He'd been contributing for 25 years. I forget how many years he was on staff, but I mean, he's irreplaceable. It's not like we could have just hired somebody to with the same knowledge tomorrow. But it was hard making up, filling the work that he was responsible for,
Exactly.
like that. And so doing what I can to make sure that this is, still going to be a position that exists after I leave is of critical importance to me. I want to make sure that I can do something to ensure that my position is valued not only at the Reader but elsewhere. It's I love the fact that a year and a half ago, Evan Moore at the Sun Times was able to become an entertainment reporter, which wasn't a position that that was a position that they more or less phased out. There wasn't really anyone doing that there. And he is that now, and he's been doing amazing work there. He's been writing critical stories that like you can't get off wire copy, that nobody else but Evan could have written. And he shows that it is important and crucial to have somebody in that position there. And he's writing about music, he's writing about movies, writing about TV, and he's doing so from a very specific Black Chicago perspective. Um, and he's coming up with stories that it's just like, man, I wish he would have written that for us. You know what I mean? That's
Right.
what I
Yeah.
love reading. And so it feels great to be part of like a larger, informal community of culture journalists in this city who are showing that this work is irreplaceable, and that it's valued and important, and there should be more people doing this.
What do you think you would be doing if not a
I have
journalist?
no idea.
So you don't know,
Like,
right?
yeah, like if there's a job as a researcher, which is just sort of like a bland, like that's not even. It's not like there are job openings for research, like cultural researchers. I figure like I guess I have to go back to school, which is not really something I want to do, but like being a librarian seems cool. But again, those aren't jobs that are really in high demand now. A lot of people want those positions.
Yeah.
Yeah, it feels parallel to journalism in a lot of ways. Like it's a position that constantly is threatened, and that the people who do them are usually overburdened and overworked, and are fulfilling three different jobs in one.
That so it reminds me of some of honestly teachers as well. And just like
Exactly.
it's very interesting how, just labor is viewed in American society in general, and like who is paid a lot and who is not paid a lot,
Exactly.
and what's the
Yeah.
first to go in terms of cuts and stuff. It's always the same story.
Yeah, it's really saddening. So, I the way that I see it is like I'm employed and I'm going to get the most out of this job as I can with the intention of doing the most that I can for our readership. I'm here for my editors and my readers. Like I'm here to do the best job that I possibly can.
Definitely. On a bit of a lighter note, you were in the 2017 Chicago Reader Best of. You were voted the third best pizza in all of Chicago. So what did that mean to you?
Sure.
Is this a
That was a bit.
a
That was a bit
grand
that I've.
honor? Is this a goal of yours? You were like, oh, I'm so glad I was named this.
Yeah, it's a joke. It's a
Resume
joke goal.
edition. Sorry, go ahead.
I think of the 2016 Best of Chicago. We were like trying to promote it in the way that all of us on staff promote, anything. And I was like, this is the Best of Chicago is great because you can write in whatever you want, like this for best rapper, this for like best theater, me for best pizza.
Right.
And a bunch of my coworkers chuckled at that, and I was like, oh, I'm making this a thing. So it's a bit that has just like completely outlasted its origin story, and I think that's hilarious. And if I were to win best pizza ever, that would make me I would be tickled. Yeah, I mean,
Of
like I think it
course.
was a year and a half ago I hired Ryan Dugan. I asked him to draw a logo for my best pizza campaign, which is currently my Twitter AVI. And he was just like, this is so silly. Yes. So I paid him to draw this, this drawing of me for best pizza. And I love that it confuses people, and that, the people who do get it and have, been reading me are so gung-ho about it. It's nice to have a little levity.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Oh yeah, I'm looking at the drawing right now. You got the chef's hat on, the little
Yeah.
bandana type of thing below the neck. Yeah, that's pretty good stuff.
Yeah.
Somebody who's just like a consumer of culture in general, right? Where are some of your favorite spots to get a bite in Chicago?
Oh God, that's so hard. I mean, Sultan's Market in Wicker has always been a place that I go to, in part because it's inexpensive. Yeah, there's like that, and this little falafel spot off of Milwaukee Avenue, kind of close to the Jewel, that with a name that I just always forget. But those two spots are great. Like I love some falafel. Marie's Pizza in Albany Park rules. Veg Soul I think it's off 79th, is amazing. I've only been there a couple times, but it's really, really terrific vegan food if you're up for that. Chicago Diner is also great vegan food.
Of course.
Yeah. Handlebar is great. These are places that I, often order in during the pandemic.
Right.
But there's so many great pizza places in town too. And also give me a frozen home run in like that.
Yeah.
That hits the spot every time.
You take home run in over Giordano's?
Oh yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah. I'm not a big deep dish guy, but I'll go for it occasionally.
Yeah, I got you. My dad would have I guess he had Giordano's, a lot growing up. He was from Winnetka, so not really. Not the city, but he's close to that stuff. But he would have we were living in New York, and like every time we'd come out to Chicago, like get frozen deep dish pizzas and bring them back to New York with us. So
that's amazing. That's dedication. I love that.
I've kind of carried on that tradition because I'll bring my New York bagels here with me on the flight over.
Dude, yeah. Give me some East Coast. The bagels here, not to my
This is
my
what
standards.
I've been saying. It's so difficult. It's.
I grew up on Bethesda bagels, which is by a family that like imported the bagel recipe from New York. But it's I love a New York bagel, but Bethesda bagels is my that is my pilgrimage.
Those are the ones for you.
Yeah.
I think best bagel I've had in Chicago thus far, probably Gotham, actually.
That's what I've heard. Yeah.
And I went there, Rich Jones, who I've known for a little while now, and I know that you two are friends of some sort at least. But
Rich Rich is an amazing person. He's a great musician. He is a great um, he's a great advocate for people in this city. He is kind of a rare person who goes out of his way to be nice to anyone, and he's a great connector. I think there's every community needs a Rich,
Hmm.
like, period. He's a remarkable person, and he's so invested in this city in a way that few people are. His dad worked for the Reader back in the day,
Oh, no kidding. Yeah,
and
his
his
mom
mom.
was actually at Northwestern working there for a while. So there was this recent hire with the athletic department that he was like, he sent it to me and he was like, "Are you seeing this bullshit?" And I was like, "I feel you, Rich." Yes.
His mom also was in a new wave band in the late 70s and early 80s that was like kind of, like one of the big players in the scene.
That's
So
phenomenal.
yeah, like underground music is like in his blood.
Leor Galil, this has been great. This has been the Real Ones podcast with your host Ben Moskow, brought to you by Project FILO. Thank you so much. I could say it a million times, but we really appreciate the time and also just some insight into all these stories you've written. It's been great, and advice for young journalists as well. Always appreciated. So
Thank you again for having me. It was really fun to talk.
yeah, absolutely, Leor. Have a good day.
You too.